Shout out Lo-Fi Lazy, $5 super chat. The Concord stuff where a developer spoke about the game's release and troubles. They went on a podcast. YouTuber Mystic has a quick video going over what they said. I pulled up the video. Shout out Mystic, 819,000 subscribers. And they have this video going over what happened with it. Let's see what they say.
We are definitely a little bit late covering this story because it came out 3 weeks ago now at this point. I've had no time to include all of this into LTPS, but there is enough here to where it's like, we'll just talk about this separately. And it's finally getting some insight into what it was like behind the scenes at Firewalk when Concord came out and inevitably being shut down, refunded, and the game being completely removed from online stores, and what was a very big public multi-million-dollar failure.
It's crazy that it was only a year ago. It both feels like yesterday and like 5 years ago, but it was September 6th, 2024 that they took the game offline. That's crazy. That's crazy. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. Yeah, it was a catastrophic disaster. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I think the player count was so freaking low that it wasn't paying anywhere close to the server costs that they had, which is why they took it offline. To a certain extent, yeah, you keep the game online, you can make some money through cosmetics and stuff, but I think that it was so underperforming that it was prohibitively expensive across the board, and they didn't see a route to recovery. The other piece, and this is just funny, at launch on Steam, they had a peak of like 600 players. I think it was 625, which is horrible, right? That's horrible for the launch of like a huge game that you spent hundreds of millions of dollars on. But there was also tweets by like Insomniac. Was it 697? Maybe. Okay, it's 697, not 625. But Insomniac, for example, and Sony Bend, they tweeted out from their official company pages, everyone at the studio is super excited to try Concord. We're all loaded up. Congrats on Firewalks launching this game or whatever. So there is a strong possibility. And I've heard stories of this where studios will have everybody in the studio play the new game from the latest studio, in the company's family, and they like take a day of work and all play it. There's a strong possibility that 20, 30, 40, 50% of those players were other PlayStation employees who were literally being paid to play the game, which just makes it so much funnier. Like it really is just amazing. When you start to think about it, like, oh, so it was already horrible. It could potentially be way, way worse when they were looking at, okay, filter by number of players not being paid to play this. Ew. Immediately. Okay, yeah, we're shutting it down. Irish, thank you for that. 10, very generous. Split Fiction is being considered as a Game of the Year contender. I think the game is based too much on it's based too much on who you played with to be considered. What are your opinions on it? I think it's phenomenal. I personally don't think it has the same magic as It Takes Two, but I really, really love Split Fiction. I've thought about replaying it recently, actually, because it's not that long, but I really, really liked it. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, because it is based on who you're playing. You're going to experience a slightly different version of the game than the person that played the other character. But I don't think that that's prohibitive or causes any significant issues. I think the game is really, really good and certainly would deserve a nomination. But I also see what you're saying. I get you. Continuing on.
Not just in PlayStation history, but really games and entertainment history. It was such a big public failure. And so it was always going to be a really interesting thing to finally have some insight on what it was like behind the scenes on the ground at Firewalk. And we finally had that from the podcast A Life Well Wasted from Robert Ashley. They flew out to Seattle and spoke with 11 people from the team across multiple disciplines, that being engineers, producers, artists, things like that. It really runs the gamut. And so we do have a lot of quotes here to digest, which right off the bat, they don't actually say it's Concord or Firewalk or PlayStation. They're being very legally NDA compliant. There's always a conflict of interest to say anything, too harshly. And that might also be part of the reason why there's still a lot of sort of skirting around things here. So there's many aspects of the game they don't directly address. But again, we still have a general sentiment on what it was like at the studio. And so,
we didn't want to break NDA, so we're going to be very, very vague. When Hot Sauce Guy and Giant Yellow Trash Monster ran into the room, we decided to change how they were presented to the audience. I wonder who they could be talking about. Also, while we're talking about Trash Monster, in case you missed the top of the stream, I'm in a secret Discord. I have a secret Discord account where I join servers that I don't want people to know that I'm in. Nothing bad. It's stuff like this. I'm in a Discord server for Concord fans, hardcore Concord fans, because I find it interesting how they still, even a year after the game is dead, they still are talking about it. And I found one of them had drawn some very, very nice fan art that is horrifying, and I don't know what to do with it. So I'm going to share it with you so you also share my trauma. They posted this. Why don't you show me why you go by he, him? She says to the gigantic trash can monster. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that. Just, yeah, sigh. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what to do with that. I literally have no words. So I'm just going to share that with you and we're going to move on. And if I ever find them posting any other funny memes and videos and pictures and stuff, I'll share them with you. They are still going hard, dude. They still like have modded versions of the game so they can play it. Like it's pretty impressive, honestly. But yeah, anyway, I'll share more of that if I find some. But now that's in your head forever. So you're welcome.
Right off the bat, I want to mention that when people initially did join the team, and we heard about this before we got this podcast, but there was indeed some sentiment going on that, hey, this thing we're building is too big to fail. One person said, and I quote here, "Every creative endeavor is a gamble, but from when I first came in 4 years ago, it was like it's too big to fail. There's so much behind this. Even if things go poorly on launch, it's going to be okay, and we'll have a year runway, 2-year runway to kind of right the ship."
And this mentality of too big to fail, I think, is how Sony approached it just in general, where they're like, we've spent so much money on it. It's like a $200 million product. There's no way a $200 million product doesn't do gangbusters. I don't know. And I think that there's been that approach with a lot of big companies, with like Saints Row reboot, for example, Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, same thing. It's like, this is an accomplished studio and we've spent ridiculous amounts of money on it. How could it possibly fail? And then we see that it doesn't matter how much you spent on it. If players don't like it, they don't like it.
I had all suspicions of this will not be something I'll play, and I don't think a lot of people I know will be into it, but I think I was going into it with, yeah, it's too big to fail, and so I had confidence that we would at least stay afloat.
That's really sad to be like, I think it'll float. It won't sink. It won't move, but it'll pretty much like sustain itself. That's kind of sad. It's also, I mean, this is somebody that's allegedly working on the game that doesn't really think that they're going to play it, doesn't think their friends will play it. And like, that's sad. That's sad. One thing I'll give Todd is that Todd has said many times that when he's working on games, their primary focus is to try and build a game that they would want to play, that they would be fans of. And if they find it fun, they're like, our audience should find it fun too. I don't know if they just downed like a fistful of Adderall every time they played Starfield and that's how they had fun with it. But somehow, you know, they missed the mark on that one. But I think that that's kind of sad to think that they're spending years working on a game that they don't even like. You know, that's just kind of sad.
Now, one person with concerns said, quote, "When I first joined, I asked some very hard-hitting questions of like, what are we doing differently than these other situations that are on the market?" And
how dare you? Shut up. Stop being negative. Support us. It's funny. I think they just swapped out the word game for situation.
I didn't get an answer that I was expecting or satisfied with. So I kind of, from moment one, had a bit of, okay, they'll have to prove it to me. It didn't really happen. Now, getting into the teaser trailer, the reveal trailer, and then ultimately the beta,
and it's amazing that they didn't have an answer for that, because like you would think that that's the most obvious question. What are you going to do that separates you out? It's a similar question as what I asked some of the designers on Marathon. I was like, what did I say? I was like, oh, they said we want to make a revolutionary extraction shooter. So when we went to lunch, I asked one of them and I said, what is revolutionary about this? Like, what's the revolutionary component? And they said the ranked system, which wasn't built yet. They had some ideas on a whiteboard, like a literal whiteboard we saw. And they said that the fourth map, which is on the Marathon ship, was revolutionary as well. But that's not coming till after launch. And that's only for endgame players. And I was like, what do you... What do you mean? It seems like there should be a little bit more to it. And it seems like a similar thing happened here where it's like, what's revolutionary about Concord? And they're like, we're working on it. It's like you'd think that they'd have an idea at the start that made them start working on it. But instead, it seems like they started searching for something else, trying to figure it out. They were a solution in search of a problem.
And I quote here, "I was ecstatic. People were cheering. Only we knew what it was, because the trailer didn't show anything. It just showed kinda our aesthetic, and that's it. So we were excited locally in the studio, but the public had no idea what it was at first. I thought..."
Yeah, do you remember do you remember that initial trailer about like with the hamburger? That's what they're referring to there, okay? So that Concord reveal trailer was the very, very first one. The teaser trailer. It's this one with like the hamburger on the side. And so people saw it and thought, oh, and it was later revealed that this is actually a brand new studio working on a brand new IP, and it's probably a live service game or something. But people saw this and thought, oh, this looks very Guardians of the Galaxy coded. So people got excited. They're like, oh, maybe it's like Destiny, but with Guardians of the Galaxy cast and better writing and stuff. Like, oh, that could be interesting. That could be really, really interesting. And I mean, you would never guess from this trailer that what they're talking about is like an Overwatch clone, but that's what it was. It's really, really baffling. But that's what he's saying when like the studio was really excited after that reveal. And I think that the reveal looked good. It just didn't communicate anything about the game, which is part of the problem.
"I thought people were just harsh during the reveal trailer. I was like, it's the gaming community. They're not exactly known for being a hyper-positive crowd. There's things we need to work on, but it's okay. Once people touch the game, it's going to change things." And then the beta numbers dropped, and numbers were not what we were expecting. And I think our mindset started shifting to, things could go really bad. Speaking more on the beta, someone said, and I quote, "It made news for how poorly it did, the beta. Like, people would go out to news sites to, like, hear about our game and how negatively it was doing instead of, like, hearing what the game was about. People heard about our game because of how poorly it did, but people didn't hear about what the game was or even really tried. There was no shortage of news articles and YouTube videos and hate on the internet about how poor the numbers were, so it was pretty apparent."
Yes. Well, this is why I've always said it's super crucial that you capture the narrative as soon as you possibly can. Because once your thing is defined, it's very difficult to undefine it and then redefine it. Which is similar to like Marathon's troubles, is the moment that your game is defined as that game that stole all the art, it's hard to shake that. The moment your game is defined as the game with the really boring gameplay, like with a Starfield, it's hard to shake that. Once your game is determined and deemed as like, oh, it's the game with like the unbelievably cringy dialogue, like with Forspoken or Saints Row reboot or Duskborn, it's very hard to shake that. Even if there's other stuff going on in the game that is genuinely interesting, like Forspoken had some genuinely cool combat, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because now all anybody can think about is the negative. So it's super crucial to get it defined on your terms as soon as you can. And that's just something, all of these games that are catastrophic failures, you'll notice a pattern that they did not define themselves early on enough in a way that was positive. And I think part of it can be that like the way that they handle the marketing is very presumptive, and they assume that the audience will like it and go along with it, and then they're shocked when they don't, because they just kind of assumed or felt entitled to the fan connection. Or they were overly coy, or sometimes, there is no escape because it's just fundamentally something players don't want. Somebody asked, like, was there any way that they could have made Concord successful? And I genuinely don't think so, because I just think at the end of the day, it was a game nobody asked for, that nobody really wanted, so it was never going to do that well. If it came out 10 years before, it probably would have popped off. But as a product, it didn't make sense. On the flip side, I think that there was potentially a way that they could have reframed maybe Forspoken where it could have done better. Because I think like if you could get past the cringy dialogue and get to the gameplay, you could have a good time with it. It was just the dialogue went viral. Like unedited dialogue went viral because of how bad it was. It was dreadful. It was dreadful.
Someone else said, and I quote, "I mean, it's certainly unpleasant. It was incredibly frustrating that we didn't do any counter-programming, that started immediately after the reveal of the game, and that it was just total radio silence. So a lot of these false narratives around the game got built, and it was outside of our control.
I wonder what they would consider false narratives about the game. I mean, maybe they're referring to like the accusations of like Sweet Baby involvement and stuff like that. And to this day, some people fundamentally misunderstand this. Concord did not fail because they had bad character designs contracted through Sweet Baby Inc. or whatever. It failed because it was a game nobody wanted, and it was really, really poorly marketed, and it was defined as a failure from the start. So Concord was not even really a video game to people. It was that thing that did terribly, you know, and so it turned into something other than a game. Like it was almost like a lolcow in and of itself that people just gawked at, you know. And I agree with this developer that the radio silence on Sony's part and the developer's part was a mistake. I think that was a mistake. They should have been more communicative. And to be clear, like I think that Hot Sauce Guy and the weird dialogue and attempt to make it seem like a narrative game, even though it wasn't, I don't think that helped. But I think at the core, 95% of the reason why Concord failed was just at the end of the day because it was a game nobody wanted. And you can even hear that in some of these interviews where they're like, yeah, it didn't seem like a game I would play or that my friends would play, but we were hoping that it would float. Like hopefully it doesn't sink. It's good enough to stay afloat.
Now going into launch.
Yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle. Everything's a piece of the puzzle. It's all a matter of degrees, right? Right, Bird Nerd? Like there's cringy dialogue in some of these games. It's a component. A bad port, it's a component. With like Saints Row reboot, it was really buggy and poorly put together, and the gameplay kind of sucked and was super outdated, and it also had terrible dialogue and all that. And figuring out what is responsible for what percentage of its failure is of course, maybe it's a fool's errand and it just doesn't matter. But I think that it was pretty clear that in the case of like Saints Row reboot, for example, the writing was a huge component. Same with Forspoken. It was a huge component because that's what went viral. And you can usually tell what was the biggest component based on what the legacy of the game is and what people talk about with it in passing. And in general with Concord, the discussion tends to be that it was a game nobody was interested in, that they spent allegedly $400 million on. And everybody's like, how did they spend that much money on it when it was never going to be successful? It came 10 years too late. I'm sure in some internet circles, the discussion's all about, you know, more cultural issues, but I think it's pretty clear that the budget and overspending on the delusional idea that this was going to become the next Star Wars level success, that was a huge component of it. Which again, that all comes from Colin Moriarty, who said that his sources were saying that Herman Holst was saying that Concord was going to be a Star Wars level success. It was going to be their version of Star Wars, the next big thing. And that is on a whole other level of delusion.
I'm going to paraphrase a lot of this here, which I kind of have to do. It's an hour-long podcast, and I don't want to sort of take all the value out of the show. I actually sincerely recommend listening to the entire thing, because there's, of course, a lot of context missing. You know, oftentimes when they're saying these things, they're joking around and just kind of laughing about the whole thing. They're, you know, generally, I think the hindsight there is that they're still pretty okay with how everything played out, and they get what happened, basically. So not to be too monotone with all the quotes here, but as far as the launch goes, right? So the game comes out day one. We saw that matchmaking, the game was basically dead. They acknowledged that. They're trying to get into one part of the game, and they can't even find people. It wasn't a technical problem. There was just nobody playing. They admitted that every stream on Twitch was sponsored, and when that sponsored stream would stop, their numbers would drop even more. So there was that. And then going offline, of course, it was definitely PlayStation's call. Not entirely surprising there either, given that it's a big multi-million-dollar public company. They're always going to get final say as the publisher. So we do know for a fact that basically nobody on the ground floor was a part of the conversation. They didn't know what was going to happen, and they were all surprised that it got to that point of the game being completely removed and taken offline. Now, getting into more of the reception side of things, here's the quotes we can share. So one of them say, and I quote here, "The most frustrating part about it to me was people had made up their mind about the game, and I felt like it was based off of, I mean, this more our fault than theirs, but we did a bad job of communicating what we were trying to do. It's just weird that there is this audience who's just constantly wanting to be excited that something fails, but the reality behind it is we're just looking at our keyboards and then we're like, oh, no job today." There's like...
I think also Concord was a victim of broader market narratives and trends. And I've said this before, but I think that Concord, part of the reason it failed was not just what it was, but what it represented. In the same vein as what Suicide Squad ran into, and other games like Duskborn and those, where it wasn't purely just on a mechanical level. Oh, well, the shooting mechanic and the dodge and the the characters are not super balanced. Like, that was never really the point. The point was, this was Sony once more spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a game that nobody really wanted, certainly not their hardcore fans. And even in how they handled its failure, it was representative of everything wrong with Jim Ryan's era of PlayStation, where he's like, okay, well, just pack it up, shut it down, fire all of them, and we'll try again next time. And that's just a really toxic way of running game studios and trying to create interesting experiences for people. It's just really, really a toxic way of doing it. And that's why people, I think, maybe reveled or even at times celebrated the failure of Concord, because it was like, yeah, finally, Jim Ryan, suck it. We didn't want this. For that budget, you could have released another Last of Us 2. You could have released another God of War. You could have released, you could have done the Bloodborne remake 5 times over with how much money you allegedly spent on this. Are you kidding me? And then you have the gall to talk about, yeah, we need to raise console prices because of extenuating business circumstances. And it's like, bro, you're the one hemorrhaging money on stupid stuff. It's like, you're the one spending $3 billion or almost $4 billion on Bungie, and then you're shocked it doesn't produce anything. Like, what are we doing? So I think that's a component of it. There certainly are people that just like to see the world burn. It's why I've stressed that I don't like the doom and gloom approach. Some people are like, well, the game industry is flopping. The game industry is collapsing. We need another market crash and all this. Like, you're rooting for the collapse of your industry that you allegedly like and care about and that you call like your hobby. That seems weird. And also, there's not really any clear indication of that. Like, yeah, games are more expensive, but guess what? They're more expensive because people keep buying them. They keep spending money, dude. It's crazy. Spending is continuing to grow. So, and I mean, I think there are also some, they call them like gaming tourists, where they come into the industry for like culture war reasons, and they're not really gamers. They don't really care that much. They're just coming in because they want to rage about Sweet Baby Inc. or whatever it may be. And those people, yeah, I don't think they're arguing in good faith, but I think it's important to not dismiss what actual gamers were saying about Concord, which is that it wasn't a game anybody wanted, and so they were kind of happy when it failed because it was something that would probably piss off Herman and Jim, because they wanted them to get back to doing what they actually wanted them to do. They wanted them to get back making those games that define the PS4 era,
This schadenfreude of, oh, big game fails, and like, that's awesome. We got to see something crash and burn. And like, that's kind of great. That's really cool. And to be a part of that process, it's really easy to bandwagon on that. Like, well, we're punching up, and not really taking into consideration that, like, well, you're punching up to that, but then all these people that work really hard on it are not those people.
Yeah, and translation, because there's a lot of likes in there. Basically, what I think they're trying to say is, I understand the desire to fight the big guys, the guys up top that are making the big decisions, and you want to screw those guys and punch up to Jim Ryan. But in the process of doing that, we are caught in the crosshairs and the crossfire, and we end up losing our jobs as a result when we were just trying to make the best game we could. We didn't choose to make this kind of game. It's more the leadership, but we're the ones that suffer. And I agree, that sucks. It sucks that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was abysmal and dreadful, and the founders of the studio and the guys responsible for it left the studio a matter of months before the first big reveal and launch. And I think it was before the launch, but anyway, they left right before the launch and got out without any sort of repercussions. They founded a new studio within Warner Brothers, and we're all good. Like, that sucks. I agree that the people responsible suffered no consequences, but it's just how it is, Like, I don't know what's the argument? Like, I agree it sucks, but what's the alternative? That we all just go and throw money at this game we hate or that we don't like, because we want to not let you suffer the consequences of the actions of the higher up. Like, I don't know what the alternative is. I agree it sucks, but there's not really a solution.
Now, there's also one very simple quote here from somebody else that's perhaps...
How come the games devs don't get hate? They made the game. I think the key is that there's differing levels of responsibility for something like this, okay? So when we see like the concept of Concord, I think is what was fundamentally flawed. Like, it's a hero shooter with nothing really that interesting to offer. There's a couple of little bitty things where like, oh yeah, some of your deployables will stay from round to round. Okay, that's, I guess, interesting. We're going to have a new cutscene every week to progress the in-game story. Okay, but like, it's not that consequential. those big overarching decisions, like creating a hero shooter like this, that's from the studio heads, that's from the people that started all of this, that sold it to PlayStation and everything. And those people are the ones who don't ultimately suffer. The people on the ground floor, the people that are like programming, doing like basic gameplay design and testing network code and stuff like that, they're going to work just like you and me. Well, I have a fake job, but they're going to work just like you. You know, they're going and they check into the office, they do their work, they go home to their families and move on. You know, the hope is that they're passionate about what they're making, but ultimately, like, they're just trying to pay their bills. It's not like they're trying to make something bad. They're doing the best with what they can do, and it's not really their choice. On the other end, there are examples where I think the devs are much more broadly responsible, but typically with most games, there is one that fail on a catastrophic level. There's one major issue, like we discussed earlier. Maybe the writing is terrible. Maybe it's super buggy, and so QA can be blamed, or maybe it's other problems within, on the technical side, or maybe it's that it's just the art direction's terrible and it looks super ugly. It could be any number of things, but usually there's one major fatal flaw with any game that flops. And it does suck that you can have a game like, say, Suicide Squad, where the game director, I think, fundamentally was responsible because it was also a game that just never should have been made. But it also restarted, had tons of secondary mechanics that never got implemented fully into the full campaign because they were little ideas that they worked on for 6 months and then scrapped later and then brought back in. But like, motion capture was phenomenal. I will say that till the day I die. Like the cinematics presentation in Suicide Squad, tremendous. Very well executed, industry leading, especially for a live service game. But all those people were affected by its failure, even though the specific thing that was going on was not anything they did. They did a great job with what they were doing, but the other department screwed it up, but that's just how this works when you're in a company working and then one guy or one, department screws up. But anyway, continuing. Sorry.
Perhaps the most accurate and honest about the whole thing. They say, quote, "It taught me something important, that there's something worse than making a bad game. It's making an uncool one." And I think that was the big thing.
1000% agree. 1000% agree. The gaming industry, especially the live service side of it, is super sensitive to peer pressure. There is nothing worse than being the one friend in the friend group who wants everybody to play the uncool game. You will get mocked and ridiculed. I still make fun of my brother Ben for how many hundreds of hours he put into Battlefield 2042. Every day I make fun of him for it. I will never let him live it down. And honestly, like, because it's also a social game where you're getting in parties of like 5 or 6 for Concord, you kind of need your friends to play with you if you want this to become your game that you put hundreds or even thousands of hours into. And if it's uncool, or they don't want to do it because they're more interested in Marvel Rivals or Overwatch, whatever it is, you're just never really going to convert. And if you're a friend group of 5 people, 4 of them want to stay playing Rivals or Overwatch, and you're the only one wanting to check out Concord, you're probably going to roll over and go just play Overwatch or Rivals. Like, it's just, that's why live service games like this that are team-based are so much harder to find success with than some of these other games, because you're not just trying to convert and win over a single player who's like playing Warzone solos or something. You're trying to win over a whole friend group, and that is way more difficult.
So when Robert heard that, they asked what was uncool. They responded with, and I quote, "The audience our publisher was catering to did not want this game at all from the get-go. Mm-hmm. The game was labeled as uncool, and so everyone who talked about it was like, yeah, but this game's uncool. Yeah, but you haven't looked into it. You haven't played it. Even my family was like, oh yeah, I've heard about this game. I've heard it wasn't cool." And I was like, bro, you're not even going to play it, please.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people dismissed it out of hand because it was uncool, sure. And I think this goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Bird Nerd, like with the character designs, the art direction and stuff, and the writing and dialogue and everything there can immediately give somebody the ick and make it also not just uncool, but kind of, it evokes the same emotion as disgust. It's that same cringe face that people get when they listen to some of the dialogue in A Dustborn or in a like really bad Saints Row reboot scene where you're just like, it's disgust. It's the same face people make when they see roadkill on the road or when they see rotting meat on the table. For some reason, it's on the table. It's that same face where it's just, And people don't want to spend time in something that disgusts them. Shocker. Okay. It's why character designs are crucial, are important. And it's why writing is important, because that feeling of cringe is activating the same part of your brain that makes you feel disgust. It's why your face does the same thing. And that's hard to undo. It really is.
And they're laughing and joking here, so I want to add that context. Again, it's not all monotone. They're still very lighthearted about the whole thing, but that is definitely one of the more... Wait. Still very lighthearted about the whole thing, but that...
Okay, no. For a second, I thought I saw one of my usernames on here. Because I played Concord when it was out. It's the best afternoon of my life. I did. We even did it on stream where I played it with you guys. And for a second, I thought I saw one of my usernames on here, but no. I was like, how funny would it be if I was in this gameplay? But no, it's not me.
Definitely one of the more candid parts of the conversation. Now, getting into the aftermath, right? So the studio getting shut down and everything like that. One person said, quote, "One of the things that a lot of people wonder in the comment section is, what are they thinking? How do these devs not know how the game is being received? We know full well. We know what's happening. We agree with it half the time. And more often than not, it's changing the game. It's just not possible given the circumstances, given the stakes, and sunk cost into these things. It was the most beautiful car that we crashed."
And that is one thing to remember whenever you're talking about this stuff, is that developers watch videos and streams and stuff. It's why I like when people get really worked up and are like, they're stupid, they suck, they're smelly, I hate them. Like they start freaking out. It's like, guys, these are human beings. Okay. I get that you didn't like the game. They're still human beings. Okay. They're still people like you and me. And they still deserve, some level of respect and dignity, right? We can joke and meme and everything. And my typical policy is that if I'm going to say anything that, I want to be comfortable saying it to their face too. And as far as I can think, I mean, I've always tried to hold to that. Where like if I see Todd or Emil, I'll tell them exactly what I've said on stream. And I think that that's important because I think a lot of people can slip into it. Can we say that about Jim Ryan? Oh, it would be very funny if I ever met Jim Ryan, because I'd be like, Jim, why do you come off like an alien wearing a human mask? Why did you take that photo with everybody smiling at PlayStation London Studios and then fire every single one of them less than a week later? That seemed kind of messed up. What was that about? We could have lots of fun with it. Yeah. Why are you the way that you are? Yeah. That's why they won't let me talk to Jim. No, he's retired now, so I can't.
A lot of the conversation that we haven't really touched on here, they loved working here, which was probably a really exciting time for a new studio being established, but they were very flattering with just how great it was to work at Firewalk and the general environment. Apparently they weren't really crunching too. I mean, there was certainly a level of putting more time into the game, but it sounds like they were all choosing to do a little bit of overtime just in the sense that they were really enjoying the creative process, and people were heard and seen in the environment. So it's great. It does sound like, at least for these 11 folks, they genuinely really loved working at Firewalk. Now, as far as PlayStation, they didn't really get to say a whole lot here, and that's probably the biggest sort of...
I mean, to a certain extent, I can imagine why they would love working on it. They got to work on this thing for years and years and years and years. And what I've always just been baffled by is how these live service games can take so long. Like, they take so long, and then you end up with something, and you're like, so you have 4 maps that are all, like, pretty small? Like, what have you been doing? And I don't think I'm the only one that kind of feels that way sometimes, where I'm like, what are you guys doing all day? what I don't know. I don't get it. I don't get where all of your time is going.
Thing they want to have guardrails on, but we do have some quotes here. So one of them is, quote, "The internet will and has said many things about how the game failed, and it was bad, and it was like many bad things about it. But the thing that I think that's missed on a lot of the public perception of that is that if the team is capable of making things as directed, that's valuable. You can absolutely argue about the direction. 100%, I'll be right there with you. It would have been excellent for our parent company to try and work with us a little bit more. It's so expensive and almost impossible to even get 100 people to get together and make something. It's so hard. We could have supported other studios. We could have ramped on to a different project, helped them finish it, and jump. Because we're all in the same business of trying to make money for a big daddy company. And so like we should be able to like actually work together, and none of that happened. So again, the big takeaway is they really love the job. They didn't want to go anywhere, even so much to the point where when they got into the conversation of how they found out about the studio closure, and these things tend to happen with very big companies. It's very abrupt. So on the ground, folks usually don't hear about it until day of, and it's almost like it's very immediate, basically. So one anecdote that was shared initially in the podcast is that somebody went to go do laundry. They missed the meeting, and like 9 minutes later, their Slack channels were cut off. Everything was cut off. Somebody went off and made a Discord so that everyone could actually rejoin and say goodbye to each other, and also be a support channel to one another by, answering questions on how do I file unemployment, how do I file for COBRA, things like that, which is always a really messy thing. Doesn't have to be, specific to Firewalk. That's always usually how that stuff goes, and it's quite ugly. But they didn't really get to address, and they probably didn't want to address certain things like the game price, the character designs, directly addressing online narratives. I think they're just trying to say what they feel comfortable saying in the moment. And there's definitely a certain, levity to the conversation, in that they really enjoyed what they were working on. They like the environment, and they stand by it. A lot of them do in this podcast, but it's very fascinating. There's obviously like a level to it of some accountability, but not really. And like, that's the issue, is that they're not directly talking about things like character designs. The one quote about how the game was perceived as uncool is probably the best that they were willing to sort of admit in the here and now. But like, that's true. That's the worst part about it, is that there's really not a whole lot you can do when you make something, and just straight up a large portion of the gaming audience looks at that and goes, nah, son, that is not for me. And there is no denying that, like, in the grand scheme of things, the vast majority of people did not play the game, and those are numbers we just have flat out. Most people did not play the game, but that's the other like hard part about the conversation surrounding Firewalk and Concord, is that it still was a game in a very, very deeply saturated market. I mean, I always find, well, at least I wonder how the game would have done like 15 something years earlier, right? Like if this
15 years earlier, yeah, it would have popped off, because that would have been pre-Overwatch. But I mean, unfortunately, they just never had that opportunity. I think the good video by Mystic putting all of this together. I appreciate it. Much appreciated, Mr. Mystic. And I think that overall, none of the developers said anything like that crazy. I think all of them put out things that made perfect sense. They were saying stuff like, you can hate the direction. We agree with you. That they disagreed on some of the stuff. They went in, started working on the game, and were shocked that they didn't have a clearer understanding of what was going to differentiate this game from others, and that wasn't something that they even really tackled until much later. And so a lot of the developers were even echoing some of the frustrations and complaints that the audience had, and other stuff. Like the one employee brought up the idea where the audience is going, how do they not realize how bad this is, or how much we don't like it? And they're like, we do. It's just not our place. Like, we can't do anything about it, And I think that is very much the case, is that for a lot of the developers, they applied for the job, they started working on it, and they put out the best thing that they could. And frankly, in a lot of ways, I think Concord, on a technical level, was really well optimized. It ran really well. It was really tight. The network code was really good. It was a very well executed game. It was just a game that nobody really wanted. And we can bring up the other stuff like the character designs and some of the cosmetics. I still insist some of the DLC cosmetics for Suicide Squad are worse than anything Concord had to offer. I mean, dude, I'm even clipped in some of these. They took it from my video looking at it. I'm looking for one in particular. Yeah, this one, the garbage bag. I get that some of these are inspired by comic books, but at some point you gotta step in and say no. Like, at some point you gotta go, fam, what are we doing? What are we doing? Can we not? Like, shocker, people didn't find this cool. I'm stunned. So I will say Concord had better cosmetics and skins than that, which is not saying a lot. But I think it's just, one of those games that failed because it was fundamentally one that nobody really asked for. which is a big problem. That's a big hurdle to get over. And two, I think it was representative of all of the frustrations that were landing at Sony's feet at that particular time. So it was just kind of a perfect storm of crap that made all of this land the way that it did. Total Malarkey, thank you for the 20. Very generous. I don't get why devs think no one can see their game and rely on hearsay. With streamers, Steam community, etc., I can see gameplay and game systems before I buy. People can see your game for what it is. Don't hide behind review. I do think that to a large extent you're right. Like when they're describing, people thought our game was uncool, so nobody wanted to try it themselves. That is something that I just don't find particularly compelling, where it's like, yeah, I looked at reviews of this game like Duskborn and I chose I don't like it, so I'm not going to buy it. Like, well, you didn't even play it. Yes, I did not, because I saw it and I didn't want to, and I didn't like what I saw, so I didn't buy it. That's how that's why reviews are a thing. Like, yeah, but you didn't even try. You didn't even play it yourself. You didn't even give it a chance. It's like, I did. And I think that's where, I'd probably slip and disagree with that. But I get what they were saying. Like, even the beta, they didn't want to try it during the beta to see if it played well or was fun. But I don't think it really would have changed anything, frankly. Also, I think the first, somebody will have to remind me, it's blurry, was the first week of the Concord beta, or maybe it wasn't even 2 weeks. I might be thinking of the marathon thing. I think the beta was like paid. You had to buy the game to get access to it. I don't think it was a full open beta. I don't think so, but I could be wrong about that. Clearly, I blocked it out of my memory. Locked it deep down. He took my thing.